It's been a long 5 years, but China is finally back on the calendar. A lot's changed since 2019. Purpose-built circuits like Shanghai are now rarer than real women on Tinder. Ricciardo's gone from being everyone's favourite driver to someone who should die in a hole, apparently, and I've put on about 20 kilograms, but the less said about that, the better. Hey there guys, I'm Will, welcome to FP1 and the Comedy Review, the show that slaps even harder than Jos Verstappen. Oh my god. It's been 1,834 days since we last visited China, which explains why there haven't been many jokes about the country in these race reviews, and why I'm probably still alive. With a revamped sprint weekend to cover then, let's make good use of whatever time I've got left, and get into the comedy review for the 2024 Chinese Grand Prix. Our unpredictable weekend in China would kick off long before the cars hit the tarmac, as the 10 Formula 1 teams rocked up to the Shanghai International Circuit to find out it had attempted to black up. The race organisers had applied a bitumen surface treatment to the circuit, which would have been fine, except they decided not to tell anyone about it. As a result, the teams arrived at the track to find their initial run plans and expectations for the weekend had to be thrown in a bin and set on fire, which turned out to be even more of a waste of time given they could have just used turn 5, but we'll get to all of that later. In other news, after paddock rumours pointed Fernando Alonso to Mercedes, then to Red Bull, then to Jos Verstappen's dungeon, the Spaniard finally made up his mind and decided that he would continue in the Aston Martin single car programme for 2025 and beyond. It was the boring option, but one that I managed to predict right, which is about as common as a Lance Stroll top 10, so I'm going to take that win. This of course comes at the same time as Honda coming out and making the bold claim that they will be challenging for the World Championship with Aston in 2026. With Fernando still expected to be in the car by that time, this is looking set to be the greatest Japanese explosion since August 1945. And like many of you, I can't wait for that. It does pose the question though, will Alonso still have the pace come 2026? He said he'll be the first to put his hand up if he's not. Let's just hope that doesn't look like this fan example from pre-season. Finally in the news, F1 would reveal its 24 race calendar for the 2025 campaign. Now let's just hold on a second. Yep, there's the Verstappen seal of disapproval. The Dutchman was rather critical of there being so many events on the schedule, prompting the sports boss Stefano Domenicali to open his mouth, which rarely ends well. This time Stefano said, and I quote, "Racing in F1 is not compulsory. You know what, at this stage, I think F1's plan is just to piss Verstappen off so much that he leaves and makes the sport interesting again. Next thing you know, they'll be replacing trophies with nighttime sessions with Kelly Piquet. Let's move on before Daniel Ricciardo rocks up with his own team and get to free practice, which would make up just one session as it's the first sprint weekend of 2024. I'm still the only one excited about that, aren't I? With Europeans suffering early morning session times yet again, I decided to sleep through this one, and when I woke up to see Lance Stroll had ended it in P1 and a Sauber in the top 10, I thought I must still be dreaming. Incredibly, neither of those would be the most surprising element of Friday, with the inside of turn 5 deciding it wanted to roleplay as a Tibetan monk and set itself on fire in protest. What caused this, you ask? Who knows? I've seen theories about sparks generated off the floor setting the track ablaze. I've seen others implying it's somehow Nikita Mazepin's fault. Either way, this is such a rare freak of nature, I doubt we'll end up seeing it again. Back to the on-track drama, and Lewis Hamilton would end up in a spat with the McLaren of Piastri, the Aussie attempting to remind the 7-time champion of his 2007 racing lines. That would be the least of #Bless worries, as he misidentified the McLaren as Norris, leading to him being cancelled by all of those old enough to download Twitter. The pit entry was causing trouble for more than just Lewis though, Fernando looking for a way out of his Aston deal in the runoff, then deciding he'd rather have a go with the team's spare chassis. But as I said, it was teammate Lance Stroll who entered the opening hour on top, which I'm sure led to panic in the social media offices as no one had pre-prepared that graphic yet. For everyone else, it was time for sprint quali, and if you're wondering what happened to the normal qualifying session, no, I haven't just missed it. Even though we know the result anyway, they've just decided to mix the format up again. New for 2024, sprint quali will now take place on Friday afternoon, followed by the sprint race itself on Saturday morning, and then Grand Prix qualifying in its usual Saturday afternoon slot. That gives teams more time to tweak their setups for the weekend, or in Mercedes' case, more time to take a pretty decent setup and experiment with it until it's a steaming hot pile of shit. At least the Shanghai weather was around to add some jeopardy to this new structure, with rain lingering as the cars came out for SQ1. Maybe that was for the best, as now another part of the circuit was on fire again. The end of that session would see George Russell in a bit of trouble, or bother as he'd probably call it. The Englishman was 20th and last until his final lap got him back into the top 15 and relegated Gasly back to the drop zone. The big shock here came from the RB in P19, and no, it wasn't Daniel Ricciardo being even more crap than usual, it was Yuki Tsunoda, which is a shame. The Honey Badger would progress to SQ2, but no further, ending up 14th as Russell again found himself in the drop zone and the Shanghai circuit covered in rain, meaning there would be no last lap heroics this time round. There were shocks on the other end of the timing sheets as well, the Kick Saubers revelling in the idea of a race with no pit stops and actually going quickly for once. Both Bottas and Slow made it into the top 10 shootout, much to the applause of the Chinese fans who, for the first time ever, had someone to cheer for until Audi show him the door at the end of the season. A wet track for SQ3 though meant pole position was down to pure driver skill, and that meant they were 9th and 10th. The top 8 shootout then very nearly became a top 7, as Charles Leclerc couldn't even manage a single outlap before his lack of brain syndrome threw him into the tyre wall. Luckily, the Monegasque was able to extricate himself without too much damage to the car, but he wasn't the only one making mistakes. Even the Dutch Messiah was struggling to stay within the white lines, putting together a lap that was only good enough in the end for P4. Instead, sprint pole would come down to Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton. The Mercedes driver was first across the line, but found his lap eclipsed by the McLaren just a few moments later. That looked to be it, except the emotional roller coaster entered another loop when Norris's time was deleted for cutting track limits at the end of the lap before. That left Hamilton on pole again, and just as the commentators were confirming his return to the front of the grid, the FIA stewards decided that they'd changed their mind. After realising that Lando had actually lost time by going through the gravel, I mean, who could see that one coming, the McLaren driver's lap was reinstated, knocking Hamilton back to P2, which is racist, apparently. So as the Black Lives Matter people booked their flights to China, here's Sergio Perez killing a bird. Now let's see if Norris can hold on to that pole in the sprint. The 19 laps on Saturday morning were always going to be exciting. With Max Verstappen in P4, there were guaranteed to be 3 overtakes, which is usually 3 more than we normally get with these. Norris would do his job on the start, that job of course being to bottle every chance at a race win and continue his PhD on the nature of runoff in high pressure situations. Hamilton would get his elbows out and push his younger compatriots off the track and down the order. Guess it's just lucky for him that this was all past the average Lando fan's bedtime. Back to the racing, and Hamilton now had Fernando Alonso for company. The Spaniard had capitalised off Aston's strong practice form, and before you ask, there's no bonus points for guessing which session Stroll went out of. Now though, Alonso had a real chance of winning a race for the first time since 2013. Well, I say a real chance, Max Verstappen is in 3rd. What started as a valiant effort ended on lap 7, when Max, who had been playing with his engine modes in the early stages, slotted one down the inside and took away 2nd place. Lewis Hamilton still had a buffer of a few seconds, but his return to form played out just like it did in 2007 when he bottled it in the final sector. Max went past and proceeded to lap a second quicker than the rest of the field for the remaining 10 laps of the race. I'm sure you expected the sprint to be pretty boring after that. It certainly didn't help that the race directors were padding time by showing us how the end of Pierre Gasly's career was going, but a little bit further up the road, a proper battle was about to kick off. Alonso was still trying to fend off the Ferraris and Perez to keep his spot on the podium. Carlos Sainz was having none of that, however, and with 3 laps to go, found a route past on the outside of turn 5. The Spanish Civil War would end in disaster after minor contact between the pair allowed Perez to luck his way by. Alonso coming out of this with a puncture which led to his eventual retirement, and as if the Spaniard hadn't suffered enough, the stewards then decided that this was worth a 10-second time penalty and 3 penalty points, which makes about as much sense to me as quantum physics would to Charles Leclerc's singular brain cell. Up at the front though, Verstappen would win yet again, with Hamilton and Checo rounding out the top 3. Right, now let's do this all over again. Actual qualifying now, and we'll start off with Logan Sargent, who thought he did a quote, pretty decent job with his P20 in sprint quali. I'm genuinely not making that up. Well, he was doing a pretty decent job as a mobile advertising board in Q1, and that's about it. Yuki Tsunoda also continued to struggle, which is still a massive shame. The huge surprise here would once again be Lewis Hamilton, who decided one bottle job wasn't good enough, and the P18 finishing position would cap off a horror show of a Saturday. That said, if you are a Lewis fan and anything in this video has been difficult for you, I recommend watching this one, as it will speed up your inevitable suicide. Magnussen and Slow would round out those who failed to make it to Q2, which saw the Ferrari of Leclerc throw it in the wall again. No, hold on, that's actually Sainz, apologies, force of habit. For the second time in 2 days though, the Ferrari proved to be built out of the same thing those Nokia bricks were in the 90s, as Carlos was able to recover to the pits with just front wing damage. Still, we don't avoid one of these. We get going again with just enough time for one more lap that saw Porridge Man make the top 10 yet again, and Lance Stroll failed to get into the top 10 yet again. With no risk of rain this time around, it was an easy pole position for Max Verstappen in Q3. That said, the battle for second place was changing every second, with the Ferraris looking to have it only to be usurped by the McLarens, then Alonso, then Perez. Verstappen then decided he'd just go even quicker, making the field look even more incompetent as the Dutchman secured Red Bull's 100th pole position, 15 years after Sebastian Vettel scored the team's first here in 2009. That weekend ended in a 1-2 on race day, and quite frankly this probably will too. Let's not waste any more time then and just get it over and done with. Sunday would kick off with this Aston Martin engineer fingering Fernando's car, and with it sufficiently wet, the lights went out and Verstappen shot off into the distance. Elsewhere, whatever that engineer was doing to Fernando's car, it clearly worked, as the Spaniard was able to swoop around the outside of Perez and take P2. I don't want to talk about Ricciardo losing 3 places, so let's just move on. Though I know some of you here don't actually watch the races anymore, so I'll give you a couple of seconds to guess how many laps it took for Checo to find his way back past Alonso. If you guessed infinity, given we're talking about Sergio Perez, you'd actually be wrong. 5 tours of the Shanghai circuit were enough for the Mexican to muscle his way back through. Alonso would then drop behind the McLaren of Norris, whose papaya outfit had spent the build-up, telling everyone how bad they were going to be in the low-speed corners. Well, clearly that was bullshit. A few cars were making early pit stops, including Yuki Tsunoda, who aimed to undercut his teammate, and Pierre Gasly, who aimed to run over his pit crew. Thankfully, the Alpine was so slow, the engineer got out of this one unscathed. While all this was going on, Charles Leclerc had remembered how to be a Formula 1 driver again, making moves on the Mercedes of George Russell and the McLaren of Piastri. But with no one able to challenge Max at the front, it looked as if this would be the best racing action until IndyCar comes on later this evening. Not quite though, said Valtteri Bottas' engine, as the thought of an impending pit stop caused it to die at the end of Sector 2. Time for a safety car then. Or apparently not, as the race officials had clearly also nodded off, and we're not even at half distance yet. It wasn't until Bottas was strolling down a live racetrack that they thought it might just be a good idea to send Bernd Maylander out there, but little did they know they were about to make the whole situation so much worse. Poor Daniel Ricciardo. The Aussie had been having a stunning weekend up to this point, and that's despite being jumped by Tsunoda after the first round of stops. By now, he'd fought his way back past his teammate on track, though when it came to the safety car, his team opted to leave the Honey Badger out, effectively face-f***ing him for the rest of the afternoon. That was until it was revealed that the race restart would actually be Attack on RB, with Kevin Magnussen assassinating Tsunoda and the feckless that is Lance Stroll giving us reason number 5469 to retire from Formula 1. His teammate Alonso caused a bottleneck of cars at the hairpin. That's alright though, these are Formula 1 drivers and have the reactions to avoid an almighty accident. Then you have Lance Stroll, who can't even ride a bike without crashing it, and thus he returned Ricciardo to previous heights in a slightly different way than he maybe planned at the start of the year. With a 10-second penalty thankfully saving the rest of the field from his antics, we would try to restart the Grand Prix again, and all the chaos had put Logan Sargent on the fringes of the top 10, so at least we're going to get some overtaking in the second half as he shifted back down the order. We haven't checked in on Lewis Hamilton yet. To sum up his Grand Prix so far, the Briton has started on the softest tyre compound, only to complain that he still wasn't fast enough. So at what stage does this just become a you problem then? Anyway, #Bless was now battling with Hulkenberg for 9th. which in fairness isn't actually half bad. We rarely see the soft tyres in the Grand Prix, but for some reason Fernando Alonso was on them for the restart. That meant he needed to take one extra pit stop compared to the rest of the field, meaning his fight back through the grid was a nice distraction from Verstappen's 10-second lead out front. Alonso was giving it everything in the closing laps and would try anything to get past the cars in front, even spilling his own excrement out the rear of his Aston Martin after this scare at the final corner. Stroll was also attempting some weight-saving techniques as he passed Magnussen for P15, not that the Chinese crowd seemed to care, but I'm half convinced they'd cheer if you shot up a school at the hairpin at this point. But I've avoided the inevitable for long enough. After 50-something laps I can't be bothered to check, Max Verstappen rounded the final corner to win yet again, with Lando Norris coming home in second, and how that happened I actually have no idea. Perez would round out the podium and the sport would celebrate Zhou's impending retirement 19 races early in a weekend that I thought was actually pretty good for 2024 standards, providing I forget everything that happened to Ricciardo here. The new sprint format will need some time to grow on me, but we won't have long until the next one in 2 weeks at Miami. I don't know about you, but I can't wait for that to be shit. Let me know what you thought on the weekend though, and vote in the poll on my community page to give me even more of your sweet engagement. If you're still awake, we've got the Grand Prix of Long Beach this evening, and I'll have a comedy review coming out on that in the next few days as well. So with that being said, make sure you get subscribed for all of that. As always, a huge thank you to all my patrons and channel members for supporting me further. They get early access and previews to a lot of this stuff, so if that interests you, head over to the links in this video's description. Anyway, for now that's all from me, so I'll see you very soon with another video, but until then, have a good one.